Preet Kaur Gill, Caroline Lucas, Sir Edward Davey, Karen Lee, Richard Burden, and myself.
Fabian Hamilton.
Marriage and Civil Partnership Consent Bill.
Second reading what day?
The 25th of January 2019, Madam Deputy Speaker.
The 25th of January 2019. Thank you. Thank you. The clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Fisheries Bill, second reading.
Now.
Secretary of State Michael Gove to move second reading.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to introduce the second reading of the Fisheries Bill under your chairmanship. If I may, I'd like to begin in introducing this legislation on a personal note. My father was a fish merchant. My family, for generations, have made their living from the sea, and that has given me a deep personal appreciation of the risks and sacrifices that those who go to sea in order to ensure that we can have healthy and nutritious food undertake. And there are members of this House who know those who have made the ultimate sacrifice in order to provide us with the food that we enjoy. And the first thing that I would like to say is that in our deliberation on this legislation, first and foremost in my mind are those who work so hard and take such risks in order to bring us the bounty of the sea. We are in all their debt. The second thing that I wanted to underline is that I'm deeply grateful to the team at DEFRA for the work that they have done in the preparation of the white paper that preceded this bill, the explanatory memorandum, and everything that goes with it. DEFRA has some of the finest civil servants in government, but the fisheries team stand out, men and women of dedication, deep knowledge and commitment, and I'm grateful to them, as I am also to my predecessors in this role. Every single one of my predecessors as Secretary of State in this role has sought to do their best for the fishing industry. It's invidious to single any out, but I do want to pay a special tribute to three ministerial colleagues or ex-ministerial colleagues. The member for North Shropshire, who has done an enormous amount to champion the interests of fishing communities across the United Kingdom. The member for West Berkshire, who, while we were in the Common Fisheries Policy, did an enormous amount to improve its operation. And, of course, while we've been in, and, of course, my colleague, the Minister of State, who has been an outstanding negotiator on Britain's behalf, and who has done, in his time in office, which I hope will continue for many years to come, an enormous amount for coastal communities across the country. And one of the pleasures in being able to bring forward this bill is also to acknowledge that across the House there is a recognition that whatever position individuals may have taken in the referendum on our membership of the European Union, there is a widespread recognition that the Common Fisheries Policy did damage. It did environmental damage to stocks of fish and to our marine environment. It did economic damage to the fishing industry, which has been such a critical part of this country's heritage and can again become a vital part of our economic future. And of course, the Common Fisheries Policy did social damage as well, because coastal communities suffered. Their economies were hollowed out and businesses collapsed as a result of its operation. And whatever position we may have taken in that referendum, taking back control of our waters, leaving the Common Fisheries Policy and becoming once again an independent coastal state gives us an opportunity to lead environmentally, to revive the fishing industry economically, and to make sure that our coastal communities once more have the opportunity of a renaissance. And with that, I'm very happy to give way to the honourable gentleman.
I thank the Secretary of State for giving way, and can I agree with him, on behalf of the SNP, about the damage the CFP did. However, can we say, when one looks at the political text for withdrawal from the EU on fishing, it says there will be cooperation internationally to ensure fishing is at sustainable levels, promote resource conservation, measures for conservation, rational management, a fisheries agreement inter alia on access to water and quota shares, etc. This is the current form in black and white. Yep. Now, while that may mean something new and better, is it not the case, given the UK's negotiating failure so far, that what we will end up with will look very similar to the terms of the CFP?
Totally.
No, not at all. I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman, for whom I have enormous respect, for acknowledging many of the defects and flaws in the common fisheries policy. But we've been clear, and that is reflected both in the draft withdrawal agreement and in the accompanying draft political declaration on our future economic partnership, that we will be an independent coastal state, and we will be negotiating at the December 2020 Fisheries Council as an independent coastal state, ready to make sure that we decide on access to our waters, we decide total allowable catches, we decide on quotas, and on that basis that we can ensure that the interests of our coastal communities are respected. And of course, as an independent coastal state, we will be governed by the United Nations Convention on the Laws of the Sea. And that landmark, I will give way in a second, that landmark and important piece of international law makes clear that all countries, all independent coastal states, will negotiate with their neighbours in order to ensure that the environmental health of fish stocks are preserved, and also that an equitable share of each nation's bounty can be negotiated, because we as a nation depend, of course, for the fish that we eat, not just on the fish in our waters, and we, of course, have the healthiest stocks of any country in the existing European Union, but we also depend on negotiations with other independent coastal states, with Norway, the Faroes, Iceland and others, in order to ensure that we get the mix of fish that consumers demand and that society has a right to expect. And I'm very happy, first of all, to give way to the Honourable Lady.
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way. Does he agree with me that any party in this chamber who promotes continued membership of the European Union are letting their fishermen down because they are already promoting continued membership of the common fisheries policy?
Well, the honourable lady knows what she's talking about, and she's absolutely right. It is the case that the Scottish National Party want us to stay in the European Union and therefore in the common fisheries policy. It is also the case that the Scottish National Party's MEPs, when given the chance to vote in the European Parliament, voted to stay in the common fisheries policy. But I do want to acknowledge that there are individual members of the SNP who don't toe the line of their leadership. There are individual voters who've given or lent the SNP their... is that the legislation that we bring forward will see powers moving to those devolved administrations. It will be a diffusion of power and a strengthening of devolution. Happy to give way.
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend for giving way. A lot of individuals and organisations campaign very hard to get the firmest rules on sustainability as part of the reform of the common fisheries policy. Will my right honourable friend give them the assurance that any vessel fishing in British waters after we leave the European Union will be required to maintain the highest levels and work with the government to have the highest levels of sustainability for those fish stocks?
My right honourable friend is absolutely right. The bill makes clear that there are principles to which this government will be held, which ensure that fishing will be sustainable and to ensure that our marine environment is restored to full health. And this bill also gives the UK government powers to ensure that no boat, no vessel can fish in our waters unless it adheres to those high environmental standards. And I'm very, very happy to give way to the Honourable Lady.
I thank the Secretary of State for giving way. Can he just be absolutely clear? At the end of March, we will leave the common fisheries policy. But we immediately go back being in it and giving all the EU the right to make decisions for however long the transition goes on. And as I listen to more and more ministers on the Today programme talking about the transition being extended and extended, it does worry me very much. Why did the Secretary of State allow the Prime Minister to accept in the withdrawal agreement that fisheries would stay in part of it as part of the transition? Why?
With respect and affection for the Honourable Lady, I'll give her one piece of perhaps unsolicited advice, which is that I find in the morning it's better not to listen to the Today programme. I find that Radio 3 or even Radio 2 ensures that I have a more equable morning. However, she makes a very important point about the transition period. It was the case, and there were a number of members of this House who hoped that in the transition period, when it was agreed earlier this year, that the Common Fisheries Policy would be outside. But there is one very, very significant departure from the overall transition period which applies to the Common Fisheries Policy, which is that the European Union acknowledges that from 2021 we will be an independent coastal state. So when we negotiate at December 2020 in the Fisheries Council, we'll still be legally a member of the European Union, but we'll be negotiating then as an independent coastal state. And that is why I said at the time that we need to keep our eyes on the prize of making sure that after that transition period we can have all the opportunities to do the right thing environmentally, economically and socially that I mentioned earlier. With your permission, Madam Deputy Speaker, I would like to take as many interventions as possible in fairness to everyone who cannot necessarily stay for the duration of the debate. Sir.
Extremely grateful for the Secretary of State for giving way. He offered the House some reassurance and warm words a moment ago about his commitment to sustainability. Could he explain, therefore, why there is only one vague mention in the bill to maximum sustainable yields? And could he give us a guarantee that under the new vision he has for fisheries management, that we will adhere to maximum sustainable yields and the scientific advice, as opposed to what we've done for years and years, which is allow total catches to exceed by up to 50% those sustainable yields?
The short answer is yes. And I'm very happy to give way to the our right honourable friend.
Grateful to the Secretary of State for giving way, because it is germane to this point about cooperation with our neighbouring states and also with the implications arising from the transitional arrangements. Can the Secretary of State tell the House how the EU-Norway-Faroes mackerel deal, which is currently up for renegotiation and for renewal in 2020, is going to be handled in practical terms, and what his government is doing to ensure that the voice of our fishermen is heard within that very important negotiation?
Well, we will be taking part in bilateral and multilateral negotiations in the run-up to December 2020 in anticipation of being, as I said earlier, a full independent coastal state from January 2021. And we will be negotiating with all our neighbours in order to ensure that we get the very best deal for our fishermen. And his second point, and his second very fair point about collaboration with fishing organisations, one of the things that we have done in the preparation of this bill is work with the Scottish Fishermen's Federation, the NFFO, a variety of other producer organisations. And of course, during the preparation of this bill, every single one of them have said that they want to see this bill on the statute book. Of course, there will be debate in committee. There may well be amendments that can refine and improve what it is that we want to do. But there is not a single representative organisation that speaks for the fisheries industry or for fish processors anywhere that does not want this bill on the statute book as quickly as possible. And I'm going to give way to my honourable friend over there.
Thank the Secretary of State for giving way. The one fly in the ointment is, of course, the elephant in the room, and that's the withdrawal deal that the Prime Minister has produced in the last number of weeks. Can he confirm that under Article 6.2 of the protocol relating to Northern Ireland, that it could be interpreted to read that every EU fisheries regulation in existence will continue to be applied to Northern Ireland fishermen alone if the backstop is applied?
I don't believe that that is the right interpretation. I do recognise that there are a number of colleagues across the House of Commons who have concerns about the backstop arrangement. But let me underline one thing, which is that under the backstop arrangement, if it were ever to come into place, the United Kingdom would be an independent coastal state. There are some who have read the withdrawal agreement to suggest that somehow that the common fisheries policy would be extended if the backstop were to come into operation, that we would not have control over our territorial waters and over our exclusive economic zone. That is not the case. We will, even in the event of the backstop coming into operation, be an independent coastal state, and fishermen, whether they are in Northern Ireland or anywhere else in the United Kingdom, will be able to take advantage of the additional fishing opportunities that arise as a result. The Honourable Lady was up early.
On that point about paragraph 6.2 of the Northern Ireland Protocol, is the Secretary of State aware that it enables vessels registered in Northern Ireland to be able to sell their goods tariff-free into the European Union but not vessels registered anywhere else in the United Kingdom? And does he therefore accept that vessels registered in Scotland and indeed in the rest of the UK will be at a competitive disadvantage when that part of the backstop comes into force, which incidentally, in terms of Article 154, is immediately?
Well, the Honourable Lady draws attention to an important point. One of the arguments that I know that we will have in this House at other points about the backstop is that there are some who argue that Northern Ireland is placed at a competitive advantage compared to other parts of the United Kingdom. There are some who argue that Northern Ireland is disadvantaged relative to other parts of the United Kingdom. One thing that is clear, however, is that Northern Ireland, an integral and valued part of the United Kingdom, when we leave the European Union, will leave alongside the rest of the United Kingdom and be part of one independent coastal state capable of taking advantage of all the fisheries opportunities listed. Very happy to give way to the right honourable gentleman.
Very grateful to the Secretary of State. When we do leave the common fisheries policy, could he give us some idea of his ambition? It seems to me that we could have a really big expansion of our domestic fishing industry, a lot more fish landed and a big increase in fish processing in the UK. Is that his ambition, and how big will it be?
Whopper, I'm tempted to say. But my right honourable friend is absolutely right. Even the Scottish Government acknowledges that there could be £1 billion bonanza for the United Kingdom if we manage fish stocks effectively, and that's all the more surprising that when the Scottish Government's own statisticians analyse the bonanza at that level, the Scottish National Party politicians in Europe and elsewhere are standing in the way of our leaving from the common fisheries policy. In stark contrast, I may say, to Scottish Conservatives. I'm very happy to give way to a very distinguished English Conservative.
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend. On the point of the backstop, if the backstop is not implemented, but the implementation is extended, can the Secretary of State just confirm to me that will mean that we will have to remain in the CFP beyond the 21 months? And is he aware, maybe he can reassure the House, that the French are circling, as we all expect them to do, with Sabine Weyand saying, and I quote, the British will have to, quote, swallow a link between access to products and fisheries in future agreements?
I note the reporting of what Ms Sabine Weyand has said. And one of the interesting things, and again I alluded to it earlier, is that different individuals in this House will have a different assessment about the draft withdrawal agreement, the advantages and disadvantages that lie within it. But it is instructive, I think, that the negotiator on behalf of the EU Commission, Ms Weyand, has felt that she's had to sweeten the pill for EU nations in order to get them to sign. It's particularly to sweeten the pill on fisheries, because it is the case that there is an acknowledgement on the part of EU nations that UK negotiators have safeguarded access to our waters, secured our status as an independent coastal state, and the initial negotiating mandate of the European Union has not been satisfied in these negotiations with respect to fisheries. But the red lines laid down by our Prime Minister have been defended. And it is absolutely critical, without prejudice to any other conversation, to acknowledge that. I'm very happy to give way, first of all, to the honourable gentleman, and then indeed to my right honourable friend.
I thank him for giving way. If we go back to powers to the devolved nations, he's well aware that his capacity in the Vote Leave campaign, he said when the Brexit dividends could be immigration powers getting devolved to Scotland. Now, immigration is crucial for the seafood processing industry, and it's crucial for the fishing boats, particularly on the west coast of Scotland. So does he agree Scotland should get control of immigration so that we can manage our fishing industry?
The honourable gentleman is absolutely right. I'm grateful to those who work in the fish processing industry and indeed offshore, who come from across the world and not just from EEA nations, in order to help ensure that industry is strong. That is why my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, has made it clear that our post-Brexit immigration policy will be one that is truly global in scope and focused on making sure that this country is an economic success and emphasising that we've taken back control. Very happy to give way to the right honourable gentleman and to my honourable friend. My right honourable friend, sorry.
I'm doubly grateful. The Prime Minister, the Secretary of State mentioned red lines. The Prime Minister has told the House on numerous occasions that we would leave the customs union, and yet the withdrawal agreement envisages very clearly that we would remain in the customs union under the backstop, and that we couldn't, having entered, we couldn't leave unless the EU consented, the so-called Hotel California arrangement. The Prime Minister also assured the House in very strong terms that she would never contemplate a border down the Irish Sea. And yet, in the agreement, including the Northern Ireland Protocol, exactly that is envisaged. I regret to say, given that, I find it difficult to take seriously the commitments that the Prime Minister now gives to this House. If I have trouble believing her, why should I believe him?
I have to say to my right honourable friend that he must, as all members of the House, must make their own judgments on what it is that they choose to believe and who it is and what it is that they wish to support. But one of the points that I would make is that...
Will my right honourable friend give way?
I'll answer that question first and then give way to the others. But one of the very first things that I would say, though, is that, partly in respect of not just the point that my right honourable friend makes, but also the point that was made beforehand by the honourable gentleman there, that we were told at different times that we would have to bend or buckle when it came to fisheries. The Prime Minister and the negotiating team have absolutely not, and it is that reason why the European Commission's own negotiator has had to attempt to sweeten this bill. It is also the case, and it will not have escaped my right honourable friend, that other countries are expressing their dissatisfaction with the withdrawal agreement for precisely that reason. And therefore, if my right honourable friend, who spent a distinguished time as a minister and as this party's Europe spokesman, he must know that if other countries are complaining that they have lost out, that is a sign that this country has secured an advantage. Happy to give way to the honourable lady. My honourable friend Ross.
Thank the Secretary of State. Further to his earlier point about expanding fishing opportunities, I'm happy to report that Brixham, in my constituency, has had another record year and in 2017 landed over £40 million worth of fish. But it's limited now because it's at full stretch. And they're anxiously waiting to hear what the Secretary of State will be doing in the way of guaranteeing that they can have access to the kind of funds, such as the European Maritime Fisheries Fund, to allow them to expand. And they're really keen to get on with it.
Well, my honourable friend makes a very good point, and may I congratulate her for championing her constituency so successfully, and also thank the fishermen of Brixham for the work that they do. It is the case that in the EU we have the EMFF, a fund which does provide support for individual fishing communities. It will be the case that this bill will make provision for a replacement so that grants and loans can be provided for just that investment. I'm going to give way, first of all, to the member for Brigham-Cleethorpes.
I thank the Secretary of State for giving way, and I want to believe everything he has said. But he will know that the industry have long memories, and they can remember the last-minute sellout in the original common market negotiations, and they still fear that that is going to happen again. Can he give an absolutely categoric answer that under no circumstances will any further concessions be granted?
Been very, very clear on fisheries how determined we are to fight. We have defended our red lines. He mentions what happened in the 1970s. I was a boy then, but the consequence of what happened in the 1970s had a profound impact on my family and on my father's business. There's no way I can ever forget what happened then, and no way that I will be anything other than a resolute champion for the interests of coastal communities like the one that he serves and represents so admirably. Happy to give way to the honourable lady.
If the Secretary of State could clarify, given that we will be in the Common Fisheries Policy according to the withdrawal agreement till December 2020, there will be the Annual Fisheries Council in 2019. We will have left the EU. Who is going to represent the UK at the Annual Fisheries Council meeting in 2019?
The Minister of State. Forgive me.
Order. I think the Secretary of State's been very generous in giving way, but I do think it's important that he's allowed to answer one question before taking another. Secretary of State.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. You're absolutely right. I want to make sure that I can answer as many questions as possible from as many parts of the House as possible, but it is also the case that this is a well-subscribed debate. It is also the case that in terms of my own remarks, I've only so far been able to make about 2 or 3 of the points that I wanted to make while I've been answering questions. But because this legislation is so important and because of the passions aroused, I'm very happy to give way to the honourable gentleman.
I thank the Secretary of State, and it would be really nice if we could talk a little bit more about fish. And I want to talk about bluefin tuna very briefly, Secretary of State. Bluefin tuna are wonderful fish that for the first time in 50, 60 years are appearing off the shore of Cornwall and up the west coast. When we've left the EU, can we look at having a recreational catch and release fishery for bluefin tuna? If we can discuss that, and if I could bring a delegation to see the Secretary of State to discuss it, I would be extremely grateful, because there is huge commercial opportunity and conservation opportunity attached to that fishery.
I agree. That is something that we are actively exploring, and one of the points that I was due to make in a little while was that recreational fishing is a critical part of the life of the nation, and also provides, through tourism and through other expenditure, support for many important parts of our rural and coastal economy. Now, I'm very happy to give way to the member for the Western Isles.
Bluefin tuna is... There was one on bluefin tuna washed up in Tulsta Beach in Lewis last weekend. Second, I would be very happy to join any delegation with the member for Broxbourne, because we have these very same interests and the same needs. But on the wider point, he mentioned Bender Buckle a while ago. On the debate on the 27th of February 2018 in Westminster Hall, an astonishing number of Tory MPs made the claim that ideally on the 29th of March at 11 p.m. we have to have an absolute 100% control over fisheries without being any part of any implementation or transition deal. This was echoed by loads of Tory MPs. Was that Bender, was it Buckle?
The interesting thing was the reason there were an extraordinary number of Conservative MPs in that debate is because there are an extraordinary number of Conservative MPs who want the very, very best for our fishing industry, and it is the case that Scottish Conservative MPs have stood up for coastal communities in a way that the Scottish National Party have signally failed to. And I'll tell you who bent and who buckled. The Scottish National Party MEPs who bent and buckled in Strasbourg and Brussels when they agreed to keep us imprisoned in the CFP. Very happy to give way to the honourable gentleman.
Grateful to the Secretary of State for giving way. There are at least 65 cooperatives in the fishing industry, worth over £48 million currently at the moment. Wouldn't one of the best ways to help boost the fishing cooperative sector, which keeps profits in hard-pressed coastal communities, be to ensure that there was radical reform of the quota system, two-thirds of which at the moment is held by just 3 opaque companies?
He makes a very important point. It is the case, as we leave the common fisheries policy, that there is an opportunity to reallocate quota. It is also the case that we have seen a reallocation of 13% of the quota, 30% uplift for the under-10 fleet already under this government. But there's a critical point. Some of the quota which is necessarily allocated is allocated for the types of stocks, pelagic stocks, which the under-10 fleet, simply because of the nature of where those fish are found, would be poorly placed to take advantage of. So he's absolutely right, there is a case for reform, but it is the case that there is a significant amount of quota that could not, at this stage, be allocated in the way that he might suggest. Now, I'm very, very keen to allow my honourable friend, who's shown remarkable patience, the chance to intervene.
Thank you for avoiding altogether the Secretary of State, but thank you. We've talked about a bonanza of fish, we've talked about recreational fishing, but will the Secretary of State give assurances that we will not bend from our standards on sustainability? Because, after all, this is a wild harvest we're talking about, and fishermen have got to make money, but they can't make it unless the stocks are sustainable. Would he also agree that in this bill you have included references to the 25-year environment plan and the nature capital approach, that this is the right way to go, and it demonstrates that our government has got the environment and sustainability at its heart?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. We adhere to the principles behind maximum sustainable yield. It is the case in the early clauses of this bill that there are clear principles which are set out by which any Secretary of State must be bound in order to put the environment and sustainability first. And more than that, as we all know, under the common fisheries policy, we have not had policies which put the environment first, but now, as an independent coastal state, we can work with organisations from Greenpeace to Charles Clover's Blue Marine Foundation in order to ensure that we have a policy that is right environmentally and right economically. Happy to give way to my honourable friend.
I'm very pleased that we're now starting putting the environment first, but almost 80% of the UK fishing fleet is in small scale and lands 11% of the fish by value. Given that this fleet is more profitable not only to local economies, employs more local fishermen and uses more sustainable fishing practices, will the bill allow larger quotas to independent vessels under 10 metres?
The bill explicitly allows us to ensure that new quota can be allocated to the under-10 fleet, which exhibits all the virtues that my honourable friend outlined. As I mentioned earlier in response to the question from the member from Harrow, it is the case that there are some aspects of quota which it would be inappropriate to transfer, but it has been the case, not least under the leadership of my right honourable friend, the member for West Berkshire, that we have already been transferring quota to the under-10 fleet for the reasons that he mentions. And I'm very happy to give way to my honourable friend.
I thank the Secretary of State for giving way. He's very generous with his time. In response to the comments by the member from Nahilan and Yar earlier, I think the Scottish Conservatives can safely say they'll take no lessons on the common fisheries policy from the SNP, who would sell us straight back into it if they had their way of re-entering Europe.
Well, the member for Dumfries and Galloway is absolutely right. I'm tempted to say, because so far we haven't had a pun in this debate, that the SNP want to have their cake and eat it. Because the truth is that they pose as defenders of Scotland's fishing communities, and yet at the same time, all the time that we were in the European Union, scarcely a peep they emitted on behalf of the fishing industry. And now that we are leaving, they still want to tie us to the common fisheries policy, because they put the abstract ideology of their separatist sentiment ahead of the real interests of Scotland's communities, and that is why they were so decisively rejected by Scotland's coastal communities at the last general election. Happy to give it.
Very grateful to the Secretary of State for giving way. My honourable friend made the point I really want to make, but I will make it again. I have the great honour of representing the fishing village of Mevagissey, and the Secretary of State may remember he did promise to come and visit the fishermen there, and they're still very much looking forward to him coming. But that thriving fishing community is made up of under 10 vessels, and so will he confirm that there will be opportunities under this bill for our under 10 fleet to take advantage of the new quota that will be available, so that they can grow and thrive and rebuild the great industry that we've lost?
My honourable friend makes a very important point, and as was underlined also by the member for Hendon. I'm about to use a word I rarely use, but I'm going to use it with greater pleasure than I've ever used it before. No. I'm tempted to say no, nay, never, no more. Anyway, the one thing I did want to underline is that the under 10 fleet, absolutely, for the reasons that have been outlined before, is a critical part of the health and vibrancy of coastal communities and of our fishing industry overall, the profitable nature of their enterprise, and also their commitment to high environmental standards should be emulated by others. I'm going to make a wee bit of progress now, if that's okay. One of the things that is clear about this bill is that it's benefited, as I say, from the support from the devolved administrations. It's also benefited from the support of NGOs. And as a result, it now allows us to ensure that as an independent coastal state we can do what so many have wished, which is fully control access to our own waters and allocate quotas in a way that we wish to. Clauses 7 and 8, 11 and 12 revoke the existing rights of EU nations to access UK waters and ensure that the UK will licence individual vessels from other nations on our terms in a way that is consistent with high environmental principles, to demonstrate that we will have taken back control not just of our territorial waters, but of our exclusive economic zone extending 200 miles out around the whole of the United Kingdom. And we will make sure, as a number of honourable members have asked, that we put conservation first. Our fish are a great natural renewable resource, and we need to make sure that the lessons of the past, the mistakes that have been made while we've been in the common fisheries policy and which other states have made through overfishing, are at last corrected. We need to make sure that the network of marine protected areas and marine conservation zones around our nation are used to regenerate fish stocks. We need to make sure that we have the effective data available in order to ensure that we set quotas and total allowable catches in a sustainable way. And we need to make sure that we use the world-leading science available in this country, from CFAS and others, in order to ensure that we set a global gold standard for conservation. One particular way in which the environmental argument has been accepted by some, but applied in a way that can be economically harmful and sometimes environmentally counterproductive, is the way in which the discard ban has operated. It is quite right that we should seek to restrict fishing in a way which might damage the health and the resilience of individual species. But it is the case, it's the nature of much of the fishing that goes on in our waters, particularly but not exclusively for the under-10 fleet, that there is a risk of bycatch. There is a risk, no matter how sophisticated the gear, that some of the fish that is caught are some of those species that we wish to protect, and that these choke species, having been caught by fishermen at a level that threatens the sustainability, have to be deployed in a way which means that those fishermen can no longer carry on, no, I won't at this point, no longer carry on their business. We will introduce, as New Zealand, Norway and other nations have, an approach which means that fishermen can catch and can land, but if they exceed the discard ban, then they will pay a penalty. This will ensure that we have a sustainable approach towards fisheries, that we enable fishermen to carry on going to sea, and that we combine both their economic resilience with the environmental resilience of the stocks that we wish to preserve. And that change is an example of the way in which we can change individual common fisheries policies, rules and regulations by giving effect to this bill and the framework that it provides. And one of the things that's clear from all the representative fisheries organisations is that they recognise that there are individual aspects of the CFP that need remedial action and reform. That can only happen if we allow this bill to pass, and that is why I think it is so important that it makes a speedy passage through this House. The other point that a number of honourable friends and honourable members have made is the importance not just of protecting diversity at sea, but protecting diversity in the fishing industry itself. And of course, we need to ensure not just that the pelagic fleets that sail from Peterhead and Fraserburgh have new opportunities, but also those who fish closer to coastal waters. In many cases, the under-10 fleets who have been praised by our colleagues have an opportunity to take advantage of new opportunities. And as a result of this legislation, we will have additional quota that we can reallocate in a way that is equitable, that is fair and that is sustainable. For the honourable gentleman, yes.
What is he just? What he's just his words on bycatch and whatever. What does that mean now for spur dog bycatches?
Sorry?
Spur dog bycatches.
I think it will be the case that it will be easier for those who are fishing and who are responsible for that bycatch to ensure that they can continue to do so in a way that is both environmentally sustainable and economically resilient. But I will come back to the honourable gentleman. I will come back to the honourable gentleman there. Yes, sir.
The Secretary of State has been very generous. But I'm trying to reconcile two things he said to you, which is, one, that we are going to be more mindful of sustainability, and secondly, that we're going to be catching more fish in future. So on a specific issue, sole, and the total allowable catch for sole in the Irish Sea, currently set at 40,000, when the scientific advice is that it should be 0. Will we be catching more or fewer sole in the Irish Sea under his future plans?
When it comes to individual species, we'll be following the scientific advice that CFAS and others give us. Overall, however, it will be the case, as we take back control, that we will have the opportunity to catch more fish in our own waters. It is the case that a majority of the fish which are caught in UK waters are not caught by UK vessels. I'll give him one particular example. If you think about cod in the English Channel, I don't know if he knows what percentage of cod in the English Channel is caught by French boats. I don't know if anyone does in this House. 83%. What percentage of cod caught in the English Channel is caught by UK vessels? Just 7%. A fundamental inequity in the allocation of national resources. This bill will allow us to decide who catches what and where, and in line with what environmental principles. It's not often that a piece of legislation comes before this House that provides us with an opportunity to say to some of the most fragile communities in our country, our coastal communities, there is real hope, there is a chance of an economic renaissance, your suffering has been recognised, and we can make a positive difference. It's not often that legislation comes before this House which, if passed, would see an industry potentially double in size and in its capacity to generate new jobs and new economic opportunities. And it's very, very rare that legislation that comes before this House achieves those social and economic goals and at the same time allows this country to underline its credentials as a leader in environmental practice of a kind that other countries would wish to emulate. But this fisheries bill manages not only to bring hope to coastal communities, not only to reinforce the economic gains of leaving the European Union, but also underlines our credentials as an environmental leader, which is why I commend this legislation to the House.
The question is that the bill be now read a second time. I'm afraid I have to now announce the results of today's deferred divisions. In respect of the question relating to taxation relief and international tax enforcement, Jersey, the ayes were 302, the noes were 238, so the ayes have it. In respect of the question relating to taxation relief and international tax enforcement, Isle of Man, the ayes were 302, the noes were 238, so the ayes have it. In respect of the question relating to taxation relief and international tax enforcement, Guernsey, the ayes were 302, the noes were 238, so the ayes have it. In respect of the question relating to the immigration health charge order, the ayes were 300, the noes were 232, so the ayes have it. Before I bring in the Shadow Secretary of State, I hope that colleagues will realise that there is a lot of pressure on time. A lot of people want to speak. So, apart from, obviously, front benchers, I will be asking